Hey, good morning, everybody. Hey, Leslie DiMattia from Church
Good,
HR Network. Thank you so much for joining me today.
good morning, Charlie. It's great to be here.
It's always great to be with you. I really appreciate you. I appreciate your team. I appreciate your value that you bring to ministries and your heart and all that you do and your passion for it. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. I'm super happy to be here. I love this topic.
Do you?
I do.
Oh my goodness. I'm glad somebody does. Let me ask you, we're going to be talking about the ABCs of compensation ministry, but let me ask you this, Leslie. Why are we talking about it? What are the big challenges with it? What are the big, I know we're going to get into the details and the ABCs of it, but give me kind of an overview of why ministries are so challenged with this area.
Yeah, it's not super easy. It's complicated to classify your employees correctly. And the law's changed a couple times over the last couple of years. And there's also a moving target when it comes to a salary requirement. And so it's complicated. And this is something that we have to keep re-going over so people get it in their minds and really understand it and can apply it to ministry well.
Yeah. And I know we address it at the boot camp each year.
Yeah.
And we were at the boot camp this last year, and it's like, we're sitting there going, gosh, we just talked about this, but that's because it's your world, my world.
Right.
We're dealing with it all the time, but it's a lot of confusion out there. And what makes it really complicated is when clergy are involved. And so there's a whole segment about clergy, and I know we're going to do a follow-up webinar in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Sign up for it, be a part of it. We want you to join us for that.
Yeah.
Everybody. And Leslie's going to be here. We're bringing in an attorney, Bob Brockman from BQB Law. And clergy are a whole different animal, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
Yeah. And in California, it makes it a little bit complicated, but the gist of it is that employers haven't always been good to their employees. And I remember a pastor telling me one time, he goes, you know what, if everybody just would treat everyone in a Christ-like manner, we wouldn't have to deal with all these laws. But our friends in Sacramento, they decide they're going to make some laws to make sure that we're treating everybody well. And we're forced to comply. The penalties are pretty severe.
Right.
It's the top reason why ministries are sued in California is employment disputes. And inevitably, there's disputes over whether or not somebody's been compensated correctly. If you haven't compensated them correctly, you owe them back pay. And
for 3 years.
For 3 years. And the penalties are very, very, very severe. And so anyway, it's important that we understand it. It's important that ministries have this resource. And again, this webinar will be posted on our website, so you can share it with others in your ministry as well, if you'd like to show it to them. But it's important that we get it. So, okay, without further ado. All right.
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. The ABCs of compensation ministry. Last week or last webinar, a couple of weeks ago, we did the ABCs of independent contractors. We're going to be doing the ABCs on compensation ministry.
Yeah.
You'll be doing the ABCs of the ministerial exception. We'll be doing lots of ABCs in the coming year, and it will be a permanent resource for ministries. And it'll be on our website. And then Leslie, I'll send it over to you so you can post it on Church HR Network as well.
Thank you. That would be great. Would appreciate it.
Okay. Leslie is going to be saying everything about the law, about implementing it at your church or your school or your camp or your conference center or your college. And so Leslie's the pro on that. And then I'll chime in when appropriate and be answering questions. Who are these people?
That's my team. I love my team. They're awesome. Really thankful that they all come along and support all the ministries that we serve.
Yeah, and they've got executive leadership background, pastoral background, law enforcement background, HR background, and they all kind of team up and do a great job. So I appreciate that a lot. And this is my team. You probably know a lot of these friendly faces from Church West, and we got Walter, our dog, there in the middle. But those are people that you've seen come out to your ministry. You're always welcome to come see us at our office as well in Redlands. All right, agenda. All right, that's 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, ABC. We're going to be talking about understanding white collar exemptions, understanding the compensation requirements, and then the duties requirements. And so these are just what we call white collar exemptions. Okay.
Okay. So we'll be doing the ABCs and the 1, 2, 3s. ABC.
1, 2, 3.
Okay. What does exempt mean?
All right. Exempt means that under the Fair Labor and Standard Act and the California Labor Code, certain qualifying employees fall under something called the white collar exemption categories. And if the position can be legitimately and legally classified as exempt, the position is exempt from overtime, meal periods, and rest periods. And we'll get into that a little bit more.
Okay.
Okay. What does it really mean? It means workers are paid, if you're an exempt employee, right? Exempt employee means you're paid to get the job done, not to work a set number of hours, but you're so highly paid that you are just paid to get this job done. And there's duties requirements and there's hours and salaries requirements in order to qualify. And we're going to break that down in a little bit.
Okay.
Okay. Employees should not treat their exempt workers as hourly employees by intensely monitoring their comings and goings. The premise behind an exempt employee is they're paid to get a job done. They're not paid by the hour. Okay. It's also supposed to relieve being an exempt employee or having the ability to classify somebody as exempt if they meet the requirements is supposed to relieve the employer of the hassle of tracking time and all those types of things. And also the exempt classifications are not a mechanism to evade overtime.
Okay.
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 All right. Under federal law, there are also some categories of exemptions. Okay. They're much different than the California exemptions that apply to ministries. Under federal law, executives can be exempt, outside sales professionals, people that work at amusement parks or recreational facilities, farmers and fishers. I love that one. Farmers and fishers can be exempt, and you can see the rest there, but there's some specific.
Aren't we all fishers of men?
Amen. Good one. High five. That's a good one.
Yeah, we're exempt. Good. We're done.
That's awesome.
We're over.
All right.
Okay.
So under California law, there are some specific exemptions that would likely apply to your organization. So that'd be the next slide, Charlie.
Okay.
Next slide.
Okay.
And those are the executive, the administrative, and the professional exemption. And there's a few more actual categories under these exempt qualifications or classifications. One is a highly paid exemption, which no church ever will use because no one is ever that highly paid. Well, maybe some, but usually they're the lead minister, and that wouldn't matter anyway. Because again, we're going to talk about ministers at our next webinar, and we're going to have our expert Bob Brockman here. And I can't wait to ask him questions that he doesn't know are coming. So super excited.
We'll throw him curveballs.
Yeah, we'll throw him curveballs. So in order to be exempt in California, there are actually two requirements. Okay. It's a salaries and hours test and a duties test. In order to be exempt in California, you have to meet both of the requirements of those tests. And we're going to go into those in a little bit of detail. The first way to tell if one of your employees is going to be exempted or not is to see if they meet the hours requirement, because full-time in the labor code is defined as 2,080 hours a year, which is 40 hours a week times 52 weeks a year. Okay. In order to be exempt in California, you have to work full-time. Can you go back to the last slide, Charlie?
Sure.
So not only do you have to work full-time, but you have to make a salary of double state minimum wage. And you can see here that state minimum wage went up January 1st of this year to $15.50 an hour. So $15.50 an hour times 2 is $31 an hour, times 2,080 hours is $64,480 in a year. And so in order to be exempt, you have to work full-time, and that's 2,080 hours a year, and you have to be paid $64,480 in a year. Okay.
And that changes every year.
Good. Good point.
Yeah. And so it's something that needs to be revisited, as soon as those are posted. When do we know when the minimum wage changes?
Usually they come out like November, December, or if they're if they're going to, they know they're going to be raising minimum wage, they'll start putting stuff out a couple months ahead of time. But this is a high minimum wage, and over the last 5 years, we've been working towards getting to $15 an hour in California. But now it's tied, the actual minimum wage is tied to a couple things, consumer price index and a couple things. So I highly expect it to continue to change. But remember, it's state minimum wage. It's not what your city or county does. So every time state minimum wage goes up, you have to multiply that times 2, right? And then do the math to figure out what the salary would be.
Okay. So yeah, again, it's state minimum wage. If you're in areas where it's $18 an hour, and like Hollywood or San Francisco, I think it's like that. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's still 64,480.
Yep. Great.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
Oh,
2008. Yeah, 2,080 hours a year. That means 40 hours a week times 52. There's no such thing as a part-time exempt employee. You can't say, okay, well, this person only works 20 hours a week, and so we're going to cut their $64,800 in half, or $64,480 in half. They only make this amount of money. No, they have to work full-time. They have to be paid $64,480. And also something that you need to know is ministers don't fall into this category. Ministers, and we're going to go into this in great detail in the next webinar, ministers do not have to meet the salary requirement, the hour requirement. You can pay them what you want and do what you want with them, but we'll talk about that in the next webinar.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so there's 3 exemptions we're going to talk about today. The first is the executive exemption. So assuming that your employee has met the hours requirement of 2,080 hours a year and the salaries requirement of $64,480 a year at this point in time, there are duties requirements they have to meet. So the duties and responsibilities of the executive exemption regarding to the management of the ministry or the enterprise or the company. Okay, the person has to either manage the entire company or a recognized department thereof. They have to be in charge of it. This position literally is responsible for the success and failure of the business or department thereof. Okay, and on top of that, they have to regularly direct the work of 2 or more employees equaling 80 hours. Okay, so they have to have oversight of 80 hours of work. All right, they also have to have the authority to hire and fire, and or they have major input in regards to those. Okay, hire, fire, advance, promote. They have to either make those decisions themselves, or great weight is given to their opinions in those matters. Okay, and here we go. They have to customarily and regularly exercise independent judgment and discretion, and they have to be primarily engaged in these duties. Okay, so these are people, if you go to the next slide, these are people like your church administrators, your human resources directors, your directors of operation, any person that holds a high level of responsibility and tasks in your organization. They're literally responsible for the success or failure of that business or department thereof. And one of the things you need to know is supervision of volunteers does not count towards the 80 hours of direct oversight. It has to be direct oversight of another employee, 80 hours worth of direct oversight. Okay. All right. So now there's another exemption. Assuming they meet the salary test of $64,480, they meet the hours requirement of 2,080 hours a year. Now they have to either perform non-manual work directly related to management policies or general school operations. Okay, so management policies are just that. People always ask me, like, well, wait, what is management policies? It means you're in the business of making policy, creating policy, giving out policy, giving great input to policy, distributing policies of the department or of the organization. Okay, and you customarily and regularly exercise discretion and independent judgment, and you regularly directly assist an employee in executive or administrative capacity. And what that really means is you're directly assisting somebody that's already in an exempt classification of executive or administrative exemption. And they perform work that is only general. They perform under general supervision work that is specialized in nature or requiring special knowledge and training. So there was an or there. It was either they perform this non-manual work directly related to management policies, they use independent discretion, or They perform work under general supervision that requires specialized or technical knowledge or training. And everybody always thinks, that's the one. We can give everybody this category. But the fact of the matter is that this requires a 4-year degree. Okay, it used to be that we would take all of our administrative assistants and say, hey, they fall under the administrative exemption. But they don't. If they don't do management policies, they don't fall under this exemption. And some, if not all, may or may not have a 4-year degree in the area in which they're working. So what's interesting about this exemption is it's harder to classify people in any of these exemptions, and this one particularly. And that's the purpose of the new laws, is to make it harder for people to be exempt, because they felt like people weren't getting paid for the actual hours worked. So here's the or. They either have a 4-year degree, or under general supervision, they execute specialized assignments and tasks. Okay.
Okay.
Awesome. All right. Again, the administrative exemption used to cover all of our admin assistants, but it doesn't anymore. It requires pretty much a 4-year degree, and management policies are just that. They have to be in the business of dealing with policy.
Okay.
Now, this is the most often requested exemption and the least applicable exemption to churches. People always want to use this one and classify their employees under this artistic profession caveat that this one has, but we're going to dig into that. So this exemption is called the professional exemption, and it means that they have to be licensed or certified in the state of California in law, medicine, dentistry, optometry, architecture, engineering, teaching, or accounting, okay? Or they're primarily engaged in an occupation commonly recognized as a learned artistic profession. Now, this professional exemption, if you're not licensed and certified in one of those areas, then people always look to the artistic profession. And under the artistic profession, this is not your graphic artist. Your graphic artist, what people say is that they can actually, through a set of steps, recreate the same work. When we're talking artistic profession, this literally means like one-time works of art. Think of Da Vinci, Monet, Rembrandt, people that make like the statue of David, or a one-time piece of art, or those types of things. Charlie, can you go back one slide?
Sure.
Great. So one of the things we need to know, you need to know too, is if you're a certified teacher, there are different salary requirements in the state of California in regards to being exempt only for that teaching position. And that is for private school teachers, and they have a kind of a complicated formula that they can find on capso.org on how to come to that actual calculation. And it's not something that I can do for you like I have for the rest of them, is because it's based upon the school district in which your school resides. Okay. All right. So next slide. Awesome. Remember, one-time works of art. This is not your graphic artist. It's not your musicians. It is not anybody that falls into those categories. It may very well be used for some of your teachers.
Leslie, are you making this like where you're saying, hey, there's some gray area and you want to be a hard line and this is where it is? Or is it really that hard of a line between the two? I mean,
yeah, it's really that hard of a line. I'm not making these things up. You can look all this stuff up yourself. Like, this is not, if you know the laws to look at and where to go, and the Fair Labor and Standards Act, it's a lot of things to look at. But the fact of the matter is, this isn't something that we're making up. So there's all kinds of case law involved in this as well, because believe it or not, in California, people sue over this stuff of being misclassified.
yeah.
And what happens is, if you're misclassified as an exempt employee and you sue your employer and they really did misclassify you, there is a lot of liability on the table for the employer, with back wages, penalties, interest. How does that interact with insurance, Charlie?
It doesn't. I mean, just largely those, you can't buy insurance for wages that are owed.
Yeah.
And if you were supposed to pay somebody wages and you fail to do so, then you're on the hook for those. And so that's really kind of the way it works. I wish I could say, oh, just buy more insurance and whatever. You can't. There's maybe some defense costs, but I'll tell you, anytime you get an employment related claim, these are the things that come into play. And we've had class action lawsuits involving preschools. And in that situation, we had the ministry shut down the preschool. And when they shut down the preschool, they also let go of the HR professional and the person that was handling the HR. And the HR person, she led the class action lawsuit. And she said, hey, I was telling the pastor over and over and over again that they need to pay everybody the right way. And they weren't. And it was, hundreds of thousands of dollars of wages that, the ministry just didn't have. And they had to pay them. So it's a really, really, really big deal that people get this right.
And I actually have ministries in my neck of the woods who've paid out a lot of money in back wage claims for this. So this is not something we want to mess around with. So just to go ahead, Charlie.
Go ahead.
Just to recap, graphic artists do not fall under the professional exemption. Can an employee fall under an executive exemption if they don't directly supervise 80 hours of work? No. Does supervising volunteers satisfy the requirement of the 80 hours? No. Can a part-time worker be exempt? No. What is the salary requirement to be exempt? Right now, it's $64,480 in California. How many hours is the exempt position based on? 40 hours a week times 52 weeks a year is 2,080 hours in a year. Should you overly track the comings and goings of exempt workers? No, but you can have them take vacation days and sick days and that kind of thing. And what does management policies mean in the administrative exemption? It means dealing with policy.
Okay. So if people have questions, they can reach out to support@churchrnetwork.com. If you're a subscriber, what types of things do you have in your resource library at Church HR Network?
Yeah, this is great. And in our resource library under workers classification, we have exempt checklists. We have information about the ministerial exception. We have a checklist about private teachers in California. If you're not from California, we have exempt checklists that apply federally. We have all kinds of stuff. And so there's a lot of stuff in there that can help you figure out how to properly classify your employees.
Okay. Hey, let me ask you a couple of questions. Okay. What about your non-exempt employees and they're going to camp and they're going to be working at camp for the week? How should the ministry handle that?
Yeah, that's hard. So on our resource library, if you're a member, there's actually a sample timesheet on how to pay your non-exempt employees that go to camp. So here's how it goes. You have to pay them for all hours worked, period, because they can't leave. Okay, they can't leave the camp. They're stuck there. Even if they can go off and have time on their own, they can't leave. Okay, so you pay them for all their 8 hours worked. You pay them time and a half for anything over 8. Anything over 12, you pay double time. You pay them 1 additional straight time hour for every meal period they were in the dining hall, which is 3. So 3 straight time meal periods. And then you can designate 8 hours of sleeping time. You don't have to pay them for 8 hours of sleeping time. But it is complicated. So,
okay. What about for camp employees? If somebody's on the camp property and they're kind of on call all the time, how do you handle like all on call employees?
So if somebody is truly on call, meaning they have to be there, they can't leave, they need to be available to respond anytime you call them, you have to pay them minimum wage.
Okay. Now, if somebody like the facilities manager, he's the person that's called if the alarm ever goes off. Go ahead.
So yeah, you would have to pay the minimum wage. What I like to do is have rotating employees that work different hours so that you're not having to pay somebody 24 hours. I know not everybody has the ability to do that, but you have to pay them minimum wage if they literally have to respond to anything that you're asking them to do.
Okay. Let's see. There were a couple of other questions that I wanted to go.
Okay.
How about this? Okay. You've told me now that you can't have an exempt and part-time person.
Yeah.
It applies differently to your part-time ministers. Is that correct?
It does. Yeah. And we're going to talk about that. I don't want the cat out of the bag. We're going to talk about that at the next webinar. So make sure you come because our expert, Bob Brockman, will be here. And I'm really looking forward to that one.
Okay. And teachers are handled a little bit differently, but it doesn't mean that you have the same flexibility with teachers that you do for clergy, right?
That is correct. In fact, teachers still have to fall under the professional exemption to be exempt, right? But there's a different calculation for the salary requirement for private school teachers, which is complex. And it's based upon the actual salaries of the teachers in the school district in which your school resides.
Okay. What about an organist? Are they specialized?
No.
All right, we're trying.
I wish. Good try. No, they're a
know.
non-exempt employee.
Okay. Maybe stained glass?
Huh?
I don't know. Maybe somebody did stained glass installation. I don't know. I'm trying to think of what works of art would be in a ministry.
If somebody made a statue, their own statue
I know.
to put out in front of the
I
church.
know. And we're always looking for ways around it, and it's tough. You know, when we went through this in our office, we changed a lot of people from being exempt to non-exempt. And we had to take it real seriously. And I think part of it is we want to give our employees balance. You know, we have people, and one guy in the office, he's texting me on the weekends, you know, asking me different things and whatnot.
Yeah.
I go, please go back to your, you know, go to your family, spend time with your family. You need to have that balance, and we need to respect their time off.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point of it. Okay, what about if, you know, the custodians at the church, they say, you know, we could, you know, we're sick of the commute, and we'd rather work 4 10-hour days.
Great question.
5 8-hour days.
Yeah. So you can have an alternative work schedule in California, but there's a complicated process by which you can have that alternative work schedule. You have to apply to the state of California to have an alternative work schedule. You have to take a secret ballot vote, and everybody in that same classification of employee must agree to have that alternative work schedule. It can't just be like, hey, Leslie wants to work an alternative work schedule, Charlie doesn't. Then it has to be filed and approved with the state of California. So you can Google that. That's a big old long process if you're interested in doing that. So good information though.
It's really unions are the ones that are able to do it. That's really about it. Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me about a split shift law?
Yeah. So if you have an employee work a split shift, meaning there's a break in their work longer than a meal period, you must pay them one additional straight time hour for that split shift. So for instance, if you have somebody come in and work from 8 to 10, and then you have somebody come back in at 2 and work from 2 to 4, you owe them an additional straight time hour for the split shift pay.
Okay. And then now let's say somebody qualifies to be exempt.
Mm-hmm.
Can we elect to treat them non-exempt?
Absolutely. You can always make everybody non-exempt and pay them overtime and all that kind of stuff.
Okay. And what if somebody qualifies as non-exempt? Can we treat them as exempt?
No, you can't.
I know.
That's problematic.
We're trying. And if the employees say, we want to waive those rights, we want to do, you know, we want to do what's reasonable. I mean, really, it's kind of silly. Some of these things, I shouldn't say it like that.
Yeah, they can't waive their right.
Yeah,
they can't waive their right.
Yeah, the laws are written in a way to protect the employees here. So, okay. Hey, Leslie, what are we doing next? What are we talking about next?
We're talking about ministers and how to pay ministers correctly. And it's going to be really, really good.
And it's going to be on the ABCs?
Wow. ABCs of ministerial compensation.
All right, that's awesome. Hey, Leslie, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We hope that you find value, and you giving your time to us by watching this and participating with us. We really appreciate it. We want to make sure that we merit that trust that you give us. So, Leslie, again, thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye, and we'll see you soon. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.